Hello, my name is Joe Puentes. Welcome to my presentation on empathy from a Christian worldview. This is for a class of my master's program, CSL 613 Empathy Training, and the professor is Dr. Knox. I think to kind of help us set the tone and kind of get lay the foundation and get some basic understandings or key concepts of empathy. There's a short video on YouTube by Brené Brown on empathy, and I'd like to play it for us.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So I had a miscarriage. At least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
And I find that fascinating about this video is that what she's really driving to is empathy is really a key component of bringing about restorative relationships, not only within 2 people, but also within yourself. And they're finding that in the growing field of neuroscience and empathy. They're finding that empathy can become a restorative factor, not only for the person's brain to heal, but also for relationship interactions or to help drive that deeper connection. Negative effects of emotional neglect, social deprivation can be the causation of severe interpersonal injury on the brain, but empathy can have a positive effect on neurodevelopment and attachment. Through empathic interaction, our brain develops in the context of our relationships, and the brain helps regulate one another during moment-to-moment interactions. So empathy is that key part that not only helps you heal internally, like your brain, but also helps you heal moment-to-moment interactions with each other. I find that pretty fascinating in the growing field of neuroscience. But we're going to find that, this is something that the Bible has known all along. And we'll get into that here in a second. Let's go over some basic concepts of empathy. Empathy is considered an essential component of the human experience as it relates to how individuals socially and emotionally connect to one another. here's some three things that I found, three basic concepts that I found with empathy. Empathy listens, begins with being present and listening to another person. Empathy feels, it helps people feel felt. And empathy acts. Empathy climbs into the darkness of others' pain and loss. So what does the Bible say about empathy? Well, empathy is woven deep into the fabric of Scripture. Virtually every instruction God offers regarding the way we're to treat others begins with empathy. Empathy causes us to pay attention. It plunks us down beside other people. It places us with them. And empathy moves us to do. It's not just a stagnant thing. It causes us to act on others' behalf. Empathy in the Old Testament is interesting. We see early on in Exodus chapter 2, verses 23 through 25, we see God demonstrating empathy from the very beginning. And one of my research, this is one of the earliest examples of God demonstrating empathy to his creation. And we see this where the children of Israel cry out to God. They're in slavery, and they're being oppressed even more and more, and so they cry out to God, and this passage tells us that God hears them. He heard them, and then he's listening to them, and then God feels with them. He knew. He came to this understanding of what was going on with them, not just cognitively, but within his heart. He knew deeply what was going on. And then we see that then God said, I'm moved by their affliction. I hear them. I feel it. I'm moved by it. I'm going to come down and I'm going to deliver them. And that's one of the earliest stories we have in the Bible about God demonstrating empathy to his creation. Empathy creates a connection and fosters belonging and enables us to act compassionately towards others, which we saw God do. And empathy is a visceral or deep inward feeling. The 20th century German philosopher Theodor Lipps coined the word empathy from the German word Einfühlung, to feel within. And empathy, when ignited within us, moves us deeply into the life of another and unites us in another person's emotional experience. And we see that with God demonstrating that to the people of Israel. So what about the New Testament? Does the New Testament have anything to say about empathy? We get a basic understanding of empathy in the New Testament from Jesus. Jesus understood the importance of empathy. Many of us have heard the stories of the woman at the well, or the time Jesus wept for his friends, and those were demonstrations of Jesus having compassion and through empathy moving to do something about the people he's interacting with there. And I think those are great stories that demonstrate that. They demonstrate Jesus feeling and listening and acting because of empathy. Jesus taught and demonstrated the importance of empathy as a necessary component of reconciliation and healing to take place in relationships. I think something that's real fascinating about this is that, Jesus just didn't show empathy towards his friends or people he didn't feel threatened by, but we also see Jesus in his own words and Matthew chapter 5 and chapter 7, Jesus highlighting the importance of empathy, or to feel with the other person that we find difficult to get along with. And in these passages, Jesus talks about, praying for your enemies, or loving those who come against you. Jesus knew that empathy is a key component to bringing about restoration, regardless if somebody is our friends or not. And empathy is a key to living life like Jesus. To me, I think the best demonstration of empathy coming from Jesus is his incarnation, or the act of God who became flesh and dwelt among us, is his greatest demonstration, which we see ultimately lived out by Jesus in his birth, death, burial, and resurrection. I think those are his greatest demonstrations of empathy. Moving on into the New Testament, I think we get a really good understanding of empathy, especially when dealing with someone that we might dislike or judge, or find it probably kind of hard to have empathy with. And we see this in the story of Peter in Acts chapter 10, where he's sitting on the roof, and he has this exchange with God about not touching or eating anything unclean, and God is telling him, hey, don't call anything that I've created or made or deemed unclean. And so Peter, really, God is cultivating Peter's heart to have empathy towards people who he would not associate with. And we see that shortly after that vision that Peter has, the Roman centurion sends his servants, they go get Peter, and Peter listens to them, and he fills with them, and he helps them, and he goes, and he basically leads, is used by God to have a deep connection with this Gentile family, who ultimately Peter leads into a deeper connection with God. They all give their lives to God and they're baptized. I think that is a great demonstration of empathy, especially towards those that we might otherwise find it difficult to have empathy or relationship connections with. So in closing, here's some things I just want to highlight about how empathy can impact our faith and how it's impacted my faith. Empathy listens. It begins with being present and listening. By faith, I am moved to go be by people and be present with them and listening, and trust that God knows what those people need. And he's going to use me for that. Empathy helps me help people feel felt, because I know I'm not alone, because of what God has demonstrated to me through Jesus, that I can go and help people know that they're not alone. And then empathy acts. It climbs into the darkness of others' pains and loss. As Jesus demonstrated and acted, and ultimately to the cross, where we as Christians are called to act out and use empathy to empower us to be faithfully used by God to be people of redemption, reconciliation, and restoration. And ultimately, empathy helps us become more like Jesus together. Empathy is ultimately the key ingredient for deeper connection with others and ultimately with God. So I hope you found some new understandings about empathy from a Christian worldview, and ultimately I hope it drives you to want to explore further what empathy means from a Christian perspective. Thank you again for viewing my presentation.